for this session today, as I said, we're covering technology leadership in 2025. Now, this is based on a technology leadership report that we ran early this year. We surveyed over 250 senior technology, finance and transformation leaders across the UK, across a number of sectors. And that identified the key challenges that they're facing, key priorities, and sort of skills that are required for success in 2025. Now, I'm pleased to say that joining me today from BIE, I've got Matthew Whipp and Saya Cornberg, who are going to be discussing these results. So, gents, I'll throw over to you to introduce yourselves.
Thanks, Matt. Obviously, two Matts on the call. I guess, obviously, firstly, thank you to everyone who took part in the technology survey. I don't know if there's any of you that have joined the call today, but obviously appreciate everyone's input into providing some useful insights as to what's on the minds of leaders going into 2025. So as you know, I'm Matt. I co-lead our technology and technology transformation practice with my colleague here, Saya. He obviously introduced himself and we'll go on to discuss some of the insights and findings from the report.
Thanks, Matt. Again, hi, I'm Saya. I've been working in the technology recruitment space for over 27 years now, focusing mainly on the C-level -1, -2 across FTSE 100, FTSE 250, PE-backed companies and privately owned companies. So again, as Matt talked about, we have worked with a number of sectors and got information and insights from those which we're about to share with you.
Perfect. Thanks both. Sure, absolute wealth of experience to share with the group today from both of you on this topic. So really looking forward to the conversation. So to kick us off then, let's have a look at the top technology priorities that were identified as part of the report. So you'll see here that out of the respondents, 49% of respondents rated cybersecurity in their top 3 priorities for 2025, which was then followed reasonably closely by AI and machine learning, and then IT and business alignment making up the top 3 priorities for 2025 for technology leaders. So Matthew and Saya, what do you make of those results? Is that does that come as a surprise to you based on the conversations that you're having, or is that sort of expected based on what you're hearing at the moment?
Yeah, I think obviously a large majority of people have obviously mentioned it as a main focus for 2025. I think there are reports in the UK that investment in cybersecurity will be up by, I think, nearly 30% ahead of the kind of global average. I think we've got some fairly interesting stuff happening in the world, global conflicts, and with kind of, I guess, the rise of kind of emerging technologies, all of which present, I guess, further threats to businesses. And I think for the most part, there are some businesses that are quite mature in this space, but for the most part, we're seeing a very varied story. We've got clients that have taken very different approaches. I know Saya can share some information around particular circumstances, some which might not work so well. But we've obviously been involved in trying to rectify that for some clients, whether it's bringing in interim resource or whether our search business is trying to, help them hire their first CISO into the business. Is there anything you want to add, Saya?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you intimated there, Matt, that there has been a number of cyber and risk over the last few months. If we look at just more recently, DeepSeek and what happened there, a number of my clients were affected and some weren't. So it's imperative, I think, for organizations at the moment that cyber security and risk management is at the top of their list. We've got everything from your sort of typical cyber criminals, nation state actors, hacktivists, all out there trying to break into organizations that we work with, and obviously ones that we don't. They are becoming far more sophisticated, and because of how people work now, a lot of my clients say, it's not just about being in the office. You've got remote workers, the Internet of Things, and particularly cloud services where organizations have outsourced that to the cloud. There is still a major threat there. So as you can imagine, it is going to be one of the top priorities for organizations. And as Matt rightly said, some organizations are going down the route of hiring an individual or individuals or a team on an interim basis. Others are hiring a permanent CISO and then building a team behind that, whether that is, again, interim or permanent. Some have outsourced it to a third party, which we've seen mixed results from clients I've worked with, where is that the right thing to do or not? And is there the same buy-in from that third party that you would see if it was people working directly for you?
Yeah, and I think as well, it's kind of attracting that talent as well. Our business is sometimes underestimating the cost of hiring highly skilled cyber teams. They building an attractive proposition for them to come in with the base salaries and comp on top that are required to secure those people. And I think on top of that as well, we're living in a more kind of data centric world. Businesses collect a lot more data for themselves, but also, customer facing organizations collecting increased amounts of customer data as well. And so I think, it becomes ever more important that you protect that data appropriately so that that information doesn't get out into the market. Obviously, it can have an adverse effect on businesses if personal data, customer data gets leaked. You're probably not going to have much returning customers, I wouldn't imagine.
Yeah. And I think there is still a lot to do internally at organizations, because even though there is continual training at most companies, I still think there's your employees are your highest risk, because they're the ones, unfortunately, that as I said, the sort of threat actors are trying to hit. And they are becoming more and more sophisticated. So there has to be that constant training of your staff to make sure they know what they're looking for, whether it's a phishing email, etc. Because it's so easy just to click on something when you're busy, and before you know it, somebody has got into your system.
Yeah, and we have had instances where we've had clients that have been held to ransom by hacker groups for millions of pounds. And they've obviously had to figure out how they kind of navigate that and work through it. They have plans in place, but are those events somewhat preventable if you get on the front foot?
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got the added pressure around GDPR
Mhm,
and the NIS directive. So
mhm.
all these things on top of you trying to run your business are not hindering, but they just add that extra pressure onto an organization. Um, and particularly if you're in the critical national infrastructure, which some of our clients are, they have to have even more heightened security than a standard organization that is outside of that. So it's key that all organizations should be taking cybersecurity and risk management very, very seriously.
Thanks both. I mean, that's super interesting. I mean, clearly it's a massive, massive issue and risk for organizations at the moment, as identified by the survey and what you are saying there. I think it's quite interesting, Sire, the point you made about whether actually those roles are going in-house or actually whether they're being outsourced. And I suppose it's that sort of what's the long-term implications and setup for teams as they look at those things. Let's move us on to the second priority there in terms of AI and machine learning. And obviously these are probably quite linked, I imagine, in terms of some of that cybersecurity as well. Just interestingly then, I mean, obviously AI and certainly generative AI has been all over the news in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. Are we seeing an increase in AI specific roles that clients are approaching us for? Is that something that is on the rise at the moment, or how are organizations sort of handling that, are you finding right now?
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, to your first point, they do interlink a bit, don't they? AI, machine learning, data, security, as advancements go in one or the other, they affect each of the others effectively. Um, I think we are seeing certainly increased conversations around demand for AI skills within our client base. Some of those seem to be almost combined with some other roles, I would say. It's almost as an add-on. And I think we did host a previous webinar back in kind of November time, I think it was, which was a group of technology leaders talking about exactly this, which is what sort of journey a business is on with their kind of AI adoption. And I think for the most part, most businesses recognize that if they don't start doing something, then their competitors will edge further ahead. The automation and efficiencies brought in will enable them to deploy more capital into growing the business. What that looks like in every different business though is very different. We've got some clients that built their own large kind of language models effectively to deal with customer experience, with internal HR policy things, and that's quite unusual. But for the most part, most businesses are kind of in this, I guess, a bit of like analysis paralysis sort of phase where they kind of know that there are endless amounts of options out there for them, but where do they really start? And I think kind of most of the advice from the community people we talk to is you just need to get started. So get on the path to trying to find ways to automate and make things more efficient to help your business grow or protect your business a bit. At the moment, the economy is been a bit kind of swinging all over the place. So I think it might help if you could just have that extra bit of edge.
Yeah, and I think just adding to that as well, the whole AI world at the moment. I was talking to a CIO of a FTSE company recently who mentioned to me that the chairman walked into a board meeting with his iPad under his arm and sat down, and his opening statement was, "My wife says we should be doing more in AI." So this is the interesting dynamics we have currently with a number of organizations is who is leading AI, the sophistication around it, and the understanding. So there's lots of organizations that are saying, yes, we need to do it, but they need to actually understand why they're doing it first of all. And I still think there is a lot of organizations are behind the curve there, and they think they need to be doing it because that's what the industry is telling them.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, there's a number of companies that, if you, particularly in FMCG manufacturing, have been using AI for a number of years, but they don't necessarily understand that that was AI, and they've just naturally moved on without knowing that they have already AI in place. But as Matt touched on there as well, I think what once you've decided you need to go down that route, and you've understood why. As you mentioned, Matt, things like the economic efficiency that AI can bring, the competitive advantage, these are key things that boards are talking about. because, as you said, the economy is not booming at the moment. So these are probably the two key areas that organisations are looking at and thinking, will AI bring us or take us over that line?
Yeah, and I think there's reports, so people kind of throw around numbers, but you can kind of increase productivity by 30%. Obviously, there are tasks that you could do within minutes that potentially might take hours, for somebody to put together. So there's immediate gains there, aren't there? And I think we're on the kind of journey towards all this evolution of AI into AGI and AI agents as well. And I think, once that kind of happens, you don't want to be behind the curve in the first instance, because you certainly will be behind the curve when the next evolution happens. So obviously there are potentially negative effects on employees of those businesses potentially. People may be implementing these things to reduce headcount. So we obviously have to recognize that. Yeah, there are some instances. There's a CEO of a global fintech business that is essentially of the opinion that they can kind of replace each role with AI, and they're working through the business and kind of almost compensating those who stay to encourage them to use more AI. And I guess then you have a shrinking working population. But it's interesting to see what different businesses have approach wise. But I don't think anyone says they've got it all right yet.
No, I would agree. And what one of the areas that, again, talking to clients recently, is whether or not we would be able to use AI eventually to replace the very large sort of ERP systems, and that I think is a very interesting area, because at the moment you've got sort of the three biggest players in the ERP market that are pushing for organizations to either upgrade or implement a new ERP system. But I would suggest in the next 3 to 5 years, talking to a number of my clients, that they're going to bring in AI to replace their ERP systems eventually. So that again will be a very interesting position for both the software providers and organizations.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Really interesting. Obviously, kind of it's moving so quickly as well, and constantly developing, isn't it? So I'm sure, like you say, Sarah, in the next sort of 3 to 5 years, who knows where we'll be in that time? I'm sure it's going to be advancing massively in that amount of time. I'll move us on to the next priority, and that was identified as one of the top three in terms of the IT and business alignment. So yeah, what are we noticing here in terms of when you're placing these senior roles from the technology team? How much of I suppose, is there a desire for the candidates to sort of have that seat at the table, so to say, in terms of that most sort of senior exposure and really sort of being involved in those senior business decisions? Are you noticing?
I
Yeah,
should
you
say,
get that side. Sorry.
yeah, this is a very interesting area, I think, because where we have seen, working with multiple clients, whether it's, as we said, a major transformation program, whether it's ERP, if you do not get the buy-in of the business from day one, then this is where technology and business, the alignment, fails. And time again, talking to multiple contractors, interims, and clients, the general feedback always is that if you don't get that business alignment, it's going to fail. And time again, people say to me, I can't understand how this organization has done exactly the same thing as X did 12 months ago. But it just seems that there is this continuous pattern that they don't get the buy-in of the business, and that creates chaos.
Yeah, and I think all the things we're talking about here, and there's a number of points, further than the top few that we'll discuss today, that all tie into this. So, thinking about innovation just in itself, so AI, machine learning, digital transformation, cloud adoption, even cyber. I think all of these things have to be tied into business goals, don't they? So if you can't get that alignment between CIOs or CTOs or whoever it might be and the business, none of this stuff's really going to happen.
And it's amazing how through simple communication you
Mhm.
can avoid a lot of the problems that happen, but still organizations seem to fail at that buying in of the business and technology.
Mhm.
And I know we're going to talk about it a bit further along in the slides, but again, people need to understand that technology now is the enabler, and there is no point businesses fighting that. They should be making sure that the either CIO, CTO, or both, and the CDO should have that voice on the board, to be able to drive clear comms throughout an organization and get that buy-in of the business.
Yeah, and we're seeing increased amounts of CIOs or number one technology leaders, disinterested in roles that don't report into a CEO. If they have to report through a CFO, they are less interested because they come from that background where they understand that it needs to be seen as a commercial function. And I think there is certainly a movement. We're seeing more roles kind of come out of the CFO and go into the CEO. I think there's various reports out there. I think PwC posted one, which is I think they expect within the next kind of 2 years to see a 50% uplift with it of CIOs reporting to CEOs, which I think means we're moving in the right direction. Obviously, you do need that collaboration between the CFO and the CIO, obviously, don't you? But having a kind of equal footing at the table is really important for the future of businesses. I think we did
Nice.
have a comment, didn't we, as well? Sorry, we did have some snippets. So Pedro Cosa, that we know relatively well, is Chief Data Officer, and he'd provide a little bit of commentary around this and also some other points we have around data. I think we were going to potentially play a clip, just him talking a bit about that. If you wanted to play that, Matt.
Yeah, perfect. I'll
Yeah.
pull that up now.
And I'm sensing this from the whole industry, is the importance of value generation, value calculation. I think we're going through these tough times where costs are cut everywhere. And unless you can prove that what you're doing is really highly valuable for the business, you can prove to the financial director or to your CEO that the team and the function is really delivering value back, I think you're in a bad position. So I don't think it's just about building capabilities and spending money building data platforms. And it's really going all along the way to really prove that those platforms and capabilities are really sweating and then producing the value that the company needs to have from a team like us.
Yeah, and I think this is just kind of echoing what we're kind of saying there. And I think it's interesting to note from the first slide, we see data strategy and governance come kind of lower, and we did see through our report that businesses generally do feel like they're in a good place when it comes to data. But speaking to our client base in the market, I think, yes, businesses are appointing data leaders, they are appointing chief data officers. But I think that they generally feel once they've made that appointment that they've kind of fixed the problem, if that makes sense. But there's such a big journey beyond that. I think there's really getting the business to own the data, really to make the most of what they have is all part of the next part of the journey. I think Pedro had a few more comments on that, so we'll kind of quickly listen to his clip and then we'll move to
When
the
I think
next
of
slide.
when I think about ownership is in data governance perspective, and I think ownership should be given to the business, to the business owners. And that to me has been a big problem, because many business owners think that data is owned by the data team, or the problems are going to be resolved and dealt with by the data team. And I think everyone agrees that, you know, at the very end, if you want to be a data-centric organization, the data should be owned by the business. The business should know the assets that they play with, the assets that they want to play with. They should given the proper standards, definitions. They should just work with the right metrics decided and agreed by them. So that ownership, I think, has been difficult in my experience, because the organization may not be mature enough, or the business owners may not just be mature enough to know what to do with it. They rely on the data team. They just think it's the data team's problem, not their problem, which I think is a big issue.
Yeah. Well, obviously, thank you to Pedro for his contributions there. I think it kind of brings to life, what's happening in that space, and maybe it isn't, as much as well addressed as companies might think, I suppose.
Nice, thanks. So let's move on then from the priorities and look at thinking about digital transformation and looking at the barriers to digital transformation and what's getting in the way of that in 2025. So you'll see here some of the top things here are legacy systems, budget constraints, resistance to change are kind of out there in terms of the top three that we're seeing. I mean, what are you guys noticing when it comes to digital transformation at the moment in terms of the roles that you're working with? Is that something that they tend to be heavily involved in, or is that the sort of thing that are they getting involved with working across some of these barriers at the moment?
I mean, I would first of all just to highlight when we talk about digital, it's an interesting point, because different organizations view digital very, very differently. So I think that's one of the first things you need to understand. Are we talking technology? Are we talking digital to the customer, B2B, etc., etc.? So there's many different guises of what digital actually means to different organizations. But I think going to that slide, I mean, legacy systems, I mean, that's I get this talking to clients regularly, is that they have very old legacy systems that can be mainframe, and they are concerned about moving to a newer system, because the stability of a mainframe system is still sort of bomb-proof in some instances. And that there is that resistance of change internally as an organization, because they are frightened of just switching that system off, which then could mean that they lose all their customers. So I think there's twofold. Some organizations have already gone that route and are going that sort of transformation fork in the road, and others are still really hesitant to shut down and move their legacy systems. So I can understand why it's one of the major barriers still to organizations.
Yeah, no, and obviously it can be pretty difficult and costly to kind of modernize aging kind of infrastructure, can't it? And there's risks of downtime, as you mentioned there, and disruption during migration and integrating between old and new systems. And then there's also the question mark around, skills shortages. Do they have the right people in their organization? Are they going to partner with a third party? Do they go to some of the larger consultancies? If they don't have the expertise internally, how do you know what's being done for you is the right thing? And I suppose this probably just emphasizes really, I guess our offering, which is bringing the right person in to kind of sit between, the business and a third party, or to help you orchestrate a program, somebody that knows what they're doing, knows that they've done it before, and can help you to really understand kind of where to start, where to get the quickest wins, where to deliver the value in the most cost effective way, so that you're not having to go and sign up to massive agreements over 12, 18, 24 months, or sometimes longer, with some of these larger businesses.
Yeah, and I would say on top of that as well, you've
Mm.
got things where there's either regulatory
Mhm.
challenges, and you've your old system can adhere to that, and where you're moving to a new system which might not have the regulatory capability for reporting or whatever it is. So again, this can be where there is that resistance. I think also if there is the lack of leadership support,
Mhm.
so from the board, as we talked about a bit earlier, if things, the status quo is fine, why do we need to change and just keep the legacy system in place, even though it might be out of support? And again, as we talked about in the last slide, that whole security, cyber security and data security, by moving away from a legacy system that could be, as I mentioned earlier, bomb-proof, to a new system, is there going to be major concerns around cyber and data?
Yeah, really interesting to kind of just think about that from a transformation perspective. I mean, just going back to your point that you made initially, Si, thinking about, actually what do we define as digital transformation? And I suppose probably most, if not all, aspects of business transformation will have a technology aspect to it. I would imagine in some form or another. I mean, are we seeing sort of CIOs and CTOs involved in those transformation projects that in terms of when we're working with clients? Is that part of the remit they're seeing there, or is that something that there's still work to do on, do we think?
I personally think there's still work to be done there. We again, it depends on the organization, how enlightened they are, how that alignment between technology and the business is. So you've got certain organizations that absolutely understand that there is that need to engage and use technology. But there's lots of organizations still that are behind the curve on that. And this is where, as I said, it's critical that the CIO, CTO, CDOs have that voice on the board, because technology is an enabler now. We can't get away from that. Every program project that an organization will implement will have some focus of technology within it, and you can't get away from that now.
No, yeah. And I think far too often you do see kind of siloed pockets of transformation in businesses, don't you, where one part of the business does something that doesn't necessarily fit in with the other side of the business, and you get conflicting kind of ideas. I think Simon Ingram just mentioned there, surely there is a tension there as staying on legacy architectures, mostly due to cost, will greatly hamper ability to embrace AI. Yeah, we agree. I think we're not saying that businesses are going to stay on their legacy systems, but I think what they're saying is that there are challenges around moving away from those legacy systems to be able to embrace, transformation and change. And I think what we're saying is you want to make sure you get it right, get the right people in. You might not have the right people internally, and you might not be able to rely entirely on the right population of people externally. And so using, us or similar people to make sure you've got tried and tested resource coming in there to make sure that you're spending your money effectively and you're doing the right things is paramount.
Suppose it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I guess part of the role of the CIO, CTO, CDOs is to I suppose, set that strategic direction to, and that vision, I guess, to move, where are these organizations going from where they are right now to where they want to get to, and starting to embrace those new things. Is that something that we think is sort of like a key element of the role, and something that those senior leaders in the technology team need to be really skilled in terms of communicating that vision, but also being able to execute on it, I guess, as well, isn't it? It's not just about painting a picture.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I keep going back to that. That's why you need that voice on the board, because it is critical, as you say, that comms is clear, and that is then cascaded a waterfall down through the organization. Because if you get that wrong, everything will fail from a technology perspective.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Right, I'll move us on to the kind of the last sort of section that we're going to focus on. So this is looking at the technology skills gap, and I guess what the data is showing us from the survey that we ran is that this is still a major challenge. It's something that's kind of been sort of highlighted for a few years now, but it's something that doesn't seem to be going away. Now, 98% of respondents that we said felt that they have some form of technology skills gap in their organization. So an overwhelming majority of our respondents felt that. And then in terms of sort of, challenges in terms of managing their current IT talent, some of the key things that came through there was kind of, struggles with upskilling current employees, some struggles with attracting top talent, and then less so, but included is sort of retention and talent shortages. I guess the first thing to ask both of you is, 98%, that's a pretty big statistic there. Does that come as a surprise to you when you see that out there?
I think we were surprised if the number was that high. I think what's interesting is probably there was another bunch of statistics that I don't think is shown on this slide, but we've got 98% of people saying there's a skills shortage or gap, but we've got kind of people seemingly here saying that they've got relatively small concerns over upskilling current employees, attracting top talent, and retention. But there was another bit of data which basically suggested that, most people were investing in trying to upskill or train their current technology capability. So I can't remember the statistics in there, but I think what was interesting to note around that was that I guess people are not worried about kind of upskilling as much, and maybe they're not worried about people leaving because they're making efforts to train and bring people on in-house. However, the overwhelming majority still think there is probably a skills gap. So I think where we kind of see that is the opportunity is to probably bring in expertise externally to come in and help you to upskill further. I think some of these training programs and stuff can be great, but I think taking advantage of the interim population to come in and help you reach your goals is kind of a no-brainer, I think.
Yeah. And I think organizations feel that there has to be this continuous development of employees, which is obviously very important, and that then leads to the third one down, which is that retention of staff. But I think there is still that concern, as we talked about at the very beginning, again about cost, and to an organization to upskill, it's not cheap. And as Matt touched on there, sometimes it's actually better to bring in external resource that then can cross-train employees who have gone and worked on multiple organizations, where they can bring that skill set that is not just learnt in a classroom, but is learnt from a true interim professional. So I think that's where clients sometimes forget that they go, oh, it's expensive to hire an interim resource, but actually the benefits they bring and the learning is absolutely key to employees in technology and across the organization.
Yeah.
And
I think also, just to add on that, I think the retention piece is interesting. We have seen better retention rates within clients over the last kind of 18 months, but I think that can just be explained by the fact that I think for the most part, I guess there's been less permanent opportunities out there in the market. And I think most people probably wouldn't want to risk leaving something to go to something that may not work out. So we've got kind of quite a cautious kind of not everybody, but I'm saying I think in general it's kind of more cautious in terms of that permanent population and people moving around less. I think as the economy and the market picks back up, I think that may not be the case.
Yeah, and a stat that talking to a number of clients, particularly in the FTSE 100, I think last year there was roughly around about 7 CIOs that moved. So that shows you the state of the market, that to try and attract that top talent is really quite difficult at the moment, because people are not willing to sort of just jump ship. And it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they've spoken to friends, family, colleagues who go, the market's been quite tough out there. I've been looking for a role for 6, 12, 18 months. I wouldn't leave where you are. Plus, the way that organizations are trying to attract top talent, I think, can be quite poor at the moment, because they're using their TA teams who are advertising via LinkedIn, and you get to submit your details by portal and you never hear anything back, which obviously is not going to attract your top talent to A, want to approach an organization in that way, and B, if they're not treated in a professional manner, why would they want to go and join that organization? So this is where, again, organizations like BIE and other search and interim firms is critical to hire that top talent for organizations.
Yeah, I think your own makes an interesting point here as well, which is around, what Tom is required and what skills and capabilities are actually required. Because with AI, I think it presents a challenge that essentially the skills and capabilities required can move on quite quickly. It's a developing topic. It's a fast moving world, and so. Yeah, it is a challenge for most businesses. I think is an interesting. Mike made a point around, is there a skills cap barrier that's partly influenced by third party and vendor outsourcing, which creates an internal knowledge or capability gap to migrate complex environments. And yeah, we have seen that as well. We have seen businesses where, I can't name names, but they've gone out to external consultancies, other providers that have been coming in to deliver transformation for them, but they've actually realized that there's a lack of capability in their internal team. And therefore they end up finding that the kind of consultancy or the third party that they've selected almost have to kind of try and train their internal teams. And we have had that in one instance where we then had to come in with an interim solution, an interim, effectively a CIO, a CTO, to come in and basically rectify what was going on internally, so that they didn't keep spending vast amounts of money with this other business, and not kind of making any progress, if that makes sense. So definitely very, very relevant points, all of which I suppose we've all got to grapple with, as things are constantly changing and evolving. But I think the important thing here is that businesses need to constantly change and evolve to keep up pace.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting. It almost really brings us full circle back to our first point when we were talking about cybersecurity and that balance between having that capability in-house versus outsourcing to a third party. And I suppose that kind of it's all interlinked, isn't it, in terms of this these skill gaps you may have, because as you say, if you're outsourcing that sort of stuff to a third party, are you developing the capability internally for the long-term success, which is always a question and a balance that you need to weigh up, I suppose. Well, gents, thanks so much for your insights there. Is there any final things that you would add before we just open up to a couple of questions?
No, I think personally, I think, yeah, it'd be good to, if there are any extra questions, to try and answer those at this stage.
Perfect. So I've got one here. So where are you seeing demand for technology leaders the most in the market, like right now? So what in the market, yeah, where are we seeing the most demand for those sorts of roles?
I would suggest it's across multiple sectors. But at the moment, I don't think there is one sector you can just point at and go, that they are hiring more than others. I think it depends on the type of role you're talking about. If it is around data, we are seeing more and more of the financial services, insurance, and even legal firms moving into that space because they have been quite far behind a number of other organizations. I think your where if it's a PE organization backed organization, they tend to be slightly more ruthless in their approach. So we are seeing gaps where they do require a CIO, CTO because of the realization of an event. And if somebody unfortunately is not taking the organization quick enough to that event, then we have seen quite a few gaps in that space at the moment.
Thanks. And just got another one come through. So, based on the point when we were talking about the sort of reporting lines and the CIOs kind of reporting into CEOs is probably the ideal for that role. When a client approaches us with a CIO role which doesn't report into the CEO and doesn't have that sort of, that senior level exposure, are we able to challenge them on this, and how successful do those conversations go often? I don't know if you've had any of those conversations yourselves, guys.
Well, I think I guess it's a pretty difficult one at that stage in the process, I suppose. We have had circumstances of people that we've placed into roles that have been reporting to a CFO, and over time, they have actually ended up reporting into a CEO, but I guess that's more of the internal conversations, getting the sponsorship from the CEO. If you're applying for a role that reports to a CFO and the CFO is going to be interviewing you at the first stage or something like that, then I think it's probably going to be not a great start to the interview, is it? That if you're kind of not wanting to report to them effectively. So I guess my advice on that would be to try and demonstrate your value to the business once you're in there, and try to, I guess, orchestrate a change internally. I think obviously on our side of things, if we're taking briefs from clients and stuff, obviously we can try to influence the client. Obviously, again, that's easier when we're talking to potentially a CEO about a briefing, or potentially if the CFO and CEO are in the briefing, then that makes things a lot easier, because we can try and influence it. Then we can say, the population of CIOs that you're looking for what you're looking to achieve, potentially you're not going to attract the top talent if you're not going to be prepared to make this role of reporting to the CEO. I don't know if you're an individual going into that circumstance, whether you'd want to scupper your chances. I guess it depends if you're interested in the company and, where they're going, I think, essentially.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that there are a number of CFOs. We're not trying to bash here, but there are a number of CFOs now that are open-minded and will actually say, look, I don't want the CIO to report into me. So sometimes you don't have to influence necessarily, because they will have that view of that individual should be reporting into either the COO, the CSO, or the CEO. So I think there is more enlightenment in that space from the CFOs in different organizations. But yeah, there's still a lot to do. And as Matt said, part of our role is to try and influence where possible an organization to think about who the CIO, CTO should be reporting into.
Thanks both. Final question then before we finish. Are we seeing any difference in terms of the different markets? So in terms of thinking about like the private equity market versus the FTSE and listed, is there any difference that we're seeing in terms of senior technology roles across those? Is there any sort of trends that you're noticing in those spaces?
So I had a conversation recently with a CEO who works in that PE space, and his analogy I thought was very interesting. I will share it with everyone here. You can use this if you want. Is that how PE firms are looking at the moment is they're in a nightclub, they're on the dance floor, but nobody's actually gone to the bar to buy a drink yet. So that's where a lot of PE companies are. They're flirting with organizations, but they're not actually putting the money where they should be. I think that will change later on this year. I think there is the feeling that a number of organizations, particularly in the UK, are relatively cheap to buy compared to the US. So I think there will certainly be more activity in that space, probably the second half of this year. And then you've got your FTSE sort of 300, 250 and 100, where again, there is that cautiousness at the moment. And I think once results have started coming out over the next 2 to 3 months, that will then decide where and how hiring is looked at from an organization.
Yeah, I think there was a bit more activity in the kind of small caps, wasn't there, last year? But yeah, mid and large cap, not so much. I think that where, in terms of where we're seeing when we're speaking to those PE firms themselves, they're thinking about their kind of portfolios. I guess we've had a number of conversations where they will be focusing on is the CFO and CIO hiring. So I guess that's encouraging. And as Saya alluded to earlier, there's been relatively small number of FTSE 100 CIOs moving around last year. And so I think hopefully we'll see a bit more of that. And we'll see more concerted effort towards getting some of this stuff done that we're talking about today.
Perfect, thanks. Just while we're on this, I'll just throw one final quick one in, just because it's on this topic. So we've had a question come in that's saying that they're hearing that many private equities need to divest before spending. Are we seeing any sign of interim hiring for exit preparation in any organizations?
I have, yes. I mean, I think there's but both ways at the moment. I've been working with a couple of organizations where either they are integrating because they've bought another organization and bring it into the bigger group, and also where I put interims in where they are looking at divesting a company out. Obviously it's that whole pre-deal, DD, post-deal, and also looking at all the TSA. So yeah, there is activity there, but it's not to the extent that I would have suggested would have been 2-3 years ago.
We're seeing lots of different situations, all right. We're seeing companies that were positioning themselves to IPO, that the markets, the capital markets, are not as favourable now. So, they are switching their leadership teams to a new strategy. We had one recently who kind of exited their CFO. New chap came in. They were looking to IPO, and now they're looking to do a P2P sale. So, I think. It's a complex market at the moment, isn't it? And people are trying to do deals, but can they meet expectations? Do the valuations sound sensible, which is another thing. But it feels like there's optimism, certainly from kind of October, November kind of onwards, I would say. There feels like there is more optimism within financial markets, and also just in general, I think, in the market as a whole.
Perfect. Well, on that sort of upbeat note there, Matt, I think that's a nice place to leave it. So, look, Matt, Si, thank you so much for your contributions in the conversation today. I really enjoyed it. Definitely a complex situation right now, but I think sounds like there's some good opportunities for technology leaders to really sort of position themselves in that strategic space and contribute to some big sort of business transformation projects. So, yeah. Complex but exciting, I think, at the same time, is how I'd summarize the conversation. So yeah, thanks both for your discussion today. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time on the next BIE webinar.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. Sit tight. Bye.
Bye.